People think betrayal is loud, shouting, slammed doors, broken plates. Mine wasn't. It sounded like coffee being poured into the wrong mug, like my name quietly disappearing from a bank account I helped build. For years, I told myself Graham just needed time, that good men could forget who helped them climb. So I stayed, cooked his dinners, balanced his books, smiled through every "you wouldn't understand." But when I found my daughter's college fund emptied, transferred by the man who once swore he'd never let us go without, something in me went still. Not angry, not broken, just done. He thinks I'll walk away quietly this time, same as always. He doesn't realize silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. And this time, I'm the one keeping the books. The house felt hollow, like someone had scraped the air out of it. I sat on the hardwood floor, knees pressed to my chest, staring at the open safe. Empty shelves, no envelopes, no deeds, no college fund for Hazel, just a blank sheet of paper and half a broken key. 30 minutes earlier, my attorney had called. Graham transferred every account, every asset, every investment into his personal corporation. I no longer had legal rights to anything. Each word hit like a scalpel, precise, cold, irreversible. On the table, my coffee still steamed. It was the only thing he hadn't taken. I walked through the house, past the framed wedding photos, the Venice trip, the plaques on his office wall that said Entrepreneur of the Year. Everything of his stayed. Everything of mine was erased. He used the very accounting system I taught him to build his empire, and to erase me from it. Leaning against the wall, I let out a dry laugh. I once taught him how to move money without leaving a trace. Now, he'd moved me out the same way. That evening, he came home, calm as ever. He said he'd leave me the house if I signed the papers. I looked straight at him. "You took everything," he shrugged. "Only what's mine." I turned away. My mother's voice echoed softly. "Don't let anyone sign for you." I smiled. He thought the story was over. He'd just written his own ending. Graham and I met when he was still a graduate student in business school. Back then, he had that kind of confidence that made every room tilt toward him. He spoke about ideas like they were already realities, about success as if it were inevitable. He once told me I was the theory and he was the practice, and together we could build something unstoppable. I believed him. After the wedding, I left my job and joined him in building Right Capital Advisors, a modest investment firm in Boulder. We worked side by side. He charmed investors and clients, while I built the framework that kept the company running. I wrote every report, handled payroll, balanced every account. He called it partnership. I called it purpose. Everything seemed perfect until the 8th year. I was reviewing our annual report when the numbers didn't match. $3 million in declared revenue. But the books told a quieter truth. Barely half of that. When I confronted him, he just laughed. "Everyone polishes their numbers," he said, as if ethics were a matter of cosmetics. I wanted to stop the contracts, pull the statements, come clean. He took my hand, pressed it tight, and said that if I said a word, everything we'd built would collapse. He told me to think of Hazel, so I did. I stayed silent. And in that silence, he learned exactly how to control me. That same year, while I was busy fixing his mistakes, he opened the first account in his name only. I never saw it happen. By the time I did, it was already too late. My forgiveness had turned into permission. Years passed. The company grew. Our faces appeared in magazines as the power couple from classroom to boardroom. But the headlines never said we, they said him. And every time I stood beside him for a photograph, I could feel myself fading, pixel by pixel, into the background of his success. The 15th anniversary of Right Capital was supposed to be a celebration. The ballroom at the Saint. Julian shimmered with crystal lights and expensive laughter. I wore the navy dress he once said made me look like I belonged at Harvard. Funny, I thought. It was the last compliment he'd given me years ago. Investors filled the room, the sound of deals disguised as toasts. Then Eleanor Pierce walked in. We'd once shared lecture halls, notes, and late-night coffees in college. Seeing her there, glowing under the lights, made my chest tighten. Graham's eyes caught hers across the room and stayed there a moment too long. Later, she approached, smiling too brightly. He invited me to consult on the new investment portfolio. Looks like we're teammates again. I smiled back, the kind of smile that holds 1,000 swallowed words. When it was my turn to speak, Graham intercepted the microphone, laughing as the crowd turned toward him. "If anyone wants to know the secret to my success," he joked, "ask my marketing team, not my wife. She just keeps the household budget balanced." The room erupted. My face burned. I stood there, frozen under chandeliers I'd chosen myself, listening to the sound of my own erasure. That night, long after the applause faded, my phone buzzed. A message from Eleanor's number. "Don't let him dim your light. I used to think you were the one he was afraid to lose." The timestamp read 12:03 Sent from Graham's phone. I deleted it without replying. Outside, the city lights blurred into my glass of wine, gold and red bleeding together. Somewhere inside that reflection, I made a promise I didn't speak aloud. I'd compromised once in the name of family. Never again. He once told me every great plan needs someone willing to take the risk. This time, the risk would be his. Sleep became a stranger every night. The soft ping of incoming emails echoed through the empty house like metal against concrete. I'd lie awake, scrolling through spreadsheets I once built by hand, old balance sheets, tax filings, company ledgers, searching for the loose thread I somehow missed. And then I found it. A bank account in the Cayman Islands. The authorized name, Eleanor Pierce. A series of regular transfers, each one matching the exact amount I'd saved for my retirement fund. My stomach dropped cold. He'd used the skills I'd taught him to erase me from my own financial life. He hadn't just taken money, he'd taken my voice out of every equation that used to have my name on it. I backed up every file, printed every page, sealed the evidence in a folder, and locked it away in a new safe. This one, at least, wasn't empty. The next morning, Graham called me into the living room. He stood over a neat stack of papers spread across the coffee table. The divorce petition, already filed. He spoke like a man discussing quarterly results. He wanted things to end cleanly. He said he'd take care of Hazel. I should focus on getting better. When I asked what that meant, he gave a patient smile. He'd already booked a therapist for me. He was worried about my mental stability, my lack of sleep, my mood swings. It hit me then. This wasn't just about assets. He wanted the narrative. A week later, at Hazel's counseling appointment, my daughter sat small in the oversized chair. She said softly that her father thought I felt too much and understood too little about money. My heart clenched, not from pain, but clarity. If he believed I was ruled by emotion, I'd use the one language he truly worshipped, finance, to dismantle him. That night, I met Judith Penrose, a retired SEC lawyer introduced by a colleague. Her voice was rough, her gaze razor-sharp. After I told her everything, she sat quiet for a long time before saying that, if I wanted to win, I couldn't fight him directly. I had to let him think I'd already lost. I nodded. I'd finally found an ally. When I left her office, she called after me, her tone almost gentle. "The only thing men like him ever fear," she said, "is their own signature." A month later, I returned to the company one last time to pack my things. The lobby felt colder than I remembered. Eleanor waited near the reception desk, her arms folded, her smile polished but fragile. She said she hoped I didn't misunderstand what was happening between her and Graham, that it was only business. I told her quietly that I didn't misunderstand. I calculated. She blinked, and for the first time, the composure cracked. I walked out carrying a single box. Inside were the documents for the charitable foundation I'd created years ago, Hope Equity. What began as a tax shelter for community grants had become something else entirely. Since 2019, Graham and Eleanor had used it as a funnel for investment transfers. I knew the language. I'd written it once. It meant laundering. Judith reviewed the records that evening and sent them to a former SEC contact. The wheels started turning, quietly and efficiently. Meanwhile, Graham was louder than ever. He appeared on a podcast called Wealth and Mindset, talking about how real men control their finances instead of hiding from them. I laughed out loud. Would he still control them when the federal investigation reached his desk? But his cruelty hadn't peaked yet. One Friday afternoon, Hazel burst into my room crying. Her father told her to pack her things. He said I wasn't stable enough to keep her. I held her close until she stopped shaking, and my mind, cold, clear, clicked into focus. If he wanted to play by the law, then the law would be my weapon. Judith drafted a new version of the divorce settlement, simple, generous. I'd surrender everything, the house, the business, the accounts. I would only keep custody of Hazel. She looked at me, uncertain. Was I sure? I was, but I asked her to add one clause, a small appendix called a liability transfer agreement, transferring every legal responsibility tied to the assets. For the first time since we met, Judith smiled. That night, I wrote in my journal that I used to fear losing everything. Now my only fear was not having the patience to watch him destroy himself. I went back to the old bank downtown, the one where I'd opened my first account back when I still believed honesty was the currency of success. Inside the safe deposit drawer, tucked beneath faded stock certificates, I found my mother's old notebook. The paper had yellowed, the blue ink still steady. Never let anyone sign for you. She'd been a bookkeeper her whole life. She knew a signature was more than ink. It was a person's soul on paper. I read that line over and over until it burned itself into me. That night, I opened the divorce files Graham had emailed, 200 pages of polished lies. In the section transferring company shares, my name appeared where my pen had never touched. The signature slanted right, a detail too careless for someone who knew I always wrote straight. I checked the document's metadata. Date created 2 months ago. My pulse slowed to an icy rhythm. He'd forged it. The next morning, I stopped by the office to collect my things. Eleanor was there, hovering over a folder with my name on it. The corner where the signature belonged had been trimmed away. She froze when she saw me. I told her the most dangerous thing in finance wasn't losing money. It was leaving evidence. Her silence said everything. For the first time, she looked afraid. That evening, Hazel came home from a weekend with her father, her eyes swollen. She'd heard him on the phone bragging that everything was already in his name, that I had nothing left. I knelt beside her and said there are things no one can ever sign away from me. She dug into her backpack and pulled out a silver USB with a crooked star sticker. She'd found it in his office. Inside were dozens of emails, Graham and Eleanor discussing Hope Equity Fund, their coded transfers, even a line that read, "If Marceline asks, tell her it's just deferred tax." My hands trembled as I forwarded the files to Judith. Her reply came fast, 2 words that felt like final judgment. "It's over, before bed." I placed my mother's notebook beside the USB, past and future side by side. I rested my hand over them both and whispered, "This time, no one signs for me." 2 weeks later, the headlines began. A small note buried in the business section. SEC launches preliminary investigation into Colorado investment firms. Graham's confidence cracked. He called Eleanor for days. She didn't answer. 3 nights later, she was arrested for insider trading. With her gone, the weight shifted squarely to him. When I met with Judith, she laid out the final settlement on her desk, my surrender neatly typed, his victory pre-signed. She tapped the final page, the liability transfer agreement. "If he signs without reading, we win," she said. "If he reads it, we still win, because he'll know he can't." I asked what if he does anyway. Judith's eyes glinted. Then it's destiny. The signing day came gray and quiet. I wore a pale gray coat, hair tied back. Graham arrived with his lawyer, Harold, who looked more anxious than his client. Graham offered to leave me some cash, said he didn't want a war. I told him I only wanted him to have everything he'd ever asked for. Harold warned him to read the appendix. Graham waved him off. He'd always believed no one knew the law, or him, better than himself. He signed page after page, my name reflected in every line he claimed. I watched in silence, feeling nothing but a calm, hollow certainty. Every stroke of his pen sounded like a nail being driven shut. When it was done, Judith filed the certified copy with the SEC before the ink even dried. In the hallway, Hazel waited, her eyes wide. "Is it over?" she asked. "Not yet," I said. He just wrote his own ending. That night, I opened my journal and wrote, "Every false number he created is now evidence. Every signature he forged to take what was mine will return to him as debt." He thought he'd won. All he really did was put his name on the bill. The Denver County Courthouse felt colder than it should have. At 9 sharp, white light filtered through thick glass, washing everything in a sterile glow. I sat at the left table in a beige suit, hair tied neatly. No makeup. Small was exactly what I wanted to look like. Across from me, Graham adjusted his silver watch, the face of a man who thought this was a victory lap, not a divorce hearing. Beside him sat Harold, his attorney, whose frown deepened with every passing minute. The clerk called the case, Wright v. Wright, and the judge, Morales, peered over her glasses. She confirmed the agreement. Graham would receive the house, the company, all assets. I would take $75,000 and custody of Hazel. No alimony, no appeals. When she turned to ask if I agreed, I lifted my head. I do. I just want him to have everything he's asked for. Her brows knit slightly, but I kept my voice even. No one is forcing me. I'm ready for this to end. Harold leaned toward his client, whispering something, but Graham cut him off with that smug half-smile I knew too well. She never understood the paperwork anyway. The judge nodded. Both parties may sign. The only sound was the scratch of pens across paper. I signed slowly, each letter deliberate. Graham signed fast, his strokes slashing the page. Harold flipped to the final document, the appendix. His face paled as he read the heading. Liability Transfer Agreement. Graham, wait! He started, but Graham waved him off. Investigation? I run the books. He scrawled his last signature with confidence that smelled like arrogance. The judge's gavel struck once. Marriage dissolved. As I gathered my copy, Graham leaned back, still smiling, basking in his supposed triumph. Harold pressed a hand to his forehead, whispering something I didn't need to hear to understand. When I stepped into the hallway, sunlight poured through the tall windows, soft and golden. For the first time in 18 years, the weight was gone. He'd finally taken everything, and I had finally chosen myself. 2 weeks later, the headlines hit every news outlet. Wright Capital Advisors under federal investigation. CEO Graham Wright charged with fraud, forgery, and money laundering. I sat in my small apartment, tea cooling in my hands, watching his face on the screen. The perfect suit couldn't hide how pale he looked, how empty his eyes were. Beneath the photo, a caption scrolled, "The man who once preached control has lost all of it." I turned off the TV. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking clock. By late afternoon, someone knocked. When I opened the door, Graham stood there, unkempt, hollow. His voice barely a whisper. He said he hadn't known it would go this far, that the investigators were threatening prison. He said he'd only ever done it for us. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Almost. "No, Graham," I said calmly. "You did it for yourself. I was just the one keeping the math straight." He tried again, promising to fix it, to give something back. I shook my head. "You already took everything, remember? Now you finally have it." I shut the door. Through the peephole, I watched him sink to his knees in the hallway. I poured another cup of tea and sat quietly. Hazel stepped from her room, asking what was wrong with her father. "He's just learning," I said. "That justice doesn't disappear. It only arrives late, but it always arrives. A year later, summer settled over Boulder like a quiet promise. On Canyon Drive, a small office bore a new sign freshly painted. The Second Ledger, Financial Recovery for Women After Divorce. Inside, sunlight warmed the sage blue walls, the same color I once painted our old kitchen. Judith, now retired, sipped coffee at the corner desk, reading the morning paper. Hazel, 15 now, typed steadily on her laptop, updating the website. "Mom, your first client's here," she said, smiling. A woman in her 50s walked in, nervous and uncertain. I offered her tea and a seat. She admitted she didn't know where to begin. "Start by opening an account in your own name." I told her. She gave a faint laugh. "That sounds too simple." "Simple," I said. "But it's freedom." When she left, Hazel handed me a letter, postmarked from the correctional facility. On the envelope, Graham Wright, inmate 427209. Inside, shaky handwriting, an apology. A request to see Hazel once. I folded the paper and passed it to my daughter. She read it quietly, then taped a small note to the office board. "Never sign away your worth." I stood still, remembering my mother's notebook. The inheritance had passed again. Later, I drove toward the mountains, sunlight spilling through the windshield. In the reflection, I saw not a woman who lost everything, but one finally free of what never belonged to her.